They were more than just movie stars. For generations of Filipinos, these faces defined love, struggle, sacrifice, and hope. We watched them rise from nothing, dominate the box office, and slowly fade from the spotlight. But long after the cameras stopped rolling, a different story continued, one that most people rarely talk about. Away from the applause and classic films was a quieter reality shaped by discipline, timing, and smart decisions. Some of these icons transformed fame into properties, royalties, and long-term investments that still support their families today. Others chose a simpler path, allowing their legacy to grow without noise or attention. This is not just about who earned the most. It's about how Golden Age stars protected their futures, how their wealth survived changing times, and why their influence still matters decades later. Some stories will surprise you. Others might completely change how you remember them. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming uploads. New stories like this are released regularly, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin with the icon whose journey started from almost nothing and changed Philippine cinema forever. And that journey begins with a name that still carries deep emotion for millions of Filipinos. Nora Aunor did not come from comfort, connections, or privilege. Her rise is one of the most talked about success stories in Philippine entertainment. Yet what happened after the fame is far less discussed. While audiences focused on her performances, Nora was building something far more enduring. At the peak of her career, she wasn't just acting in films. She was releasing hit records, performing sold-out concerts, and commanding top billing across multiple studios. Those years generated massive earnings, especially during a time when stars with her level of popularity were paid consistently and frequently. Unlike many celebrities who spent freely, Nora was known to be cautious, selective, and focused on longevity rather than excess.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Over time, her wealth shifted away from visibility and towards sustainability. Royalties from her films and music continued long after their initial release. Reruns, international screenings, and later restorations of her work quietly added to her income. Recognition abroad also elevated the value of her filmography, turning her body of work into long-term intellectual property, rather than just past performances. What makes her story even more compelling is how understated it all was. There were no public displays of luxury, no aggressive business branding, and very little discussion of assets. Yet reports and industry insiders have long suggested that her careful approach allowed her to maintain financial stability even during periods when she stepped away from the spotlight. Her story isn't about excess, it's about survival, control, and knowing when to protect what you've earned. But while Nora's wealth was built through restraint, the next icon on our list chose an entirely different path. One defined by elegance, discipline, and quiet strength. While Nora Aunor's story was shaped by restraint and survival, the next icon built her legacy on composure, control, and consistency. Susan Roces was never loud about success. At the height of her career, she was one of the most in-demand actresses of the Golden Age, commanding steady lead roles and dependable pay in an era when studio-backed stars enjoyed long-term financial stability. Unlike others who chased constant reinvention, Susan maintained a carefully curated career that prioritized longevity over excess.
Many events during the course of my father's career as a doctor.
Her approach to wealth mirrored her public image, measured, deliberate, and private. Industry insiders have long noted that she avoided reckless spending and chose security over spectacle. Properties acquired during her most productive years were held quietly, with little public discussion, allowing their value to grow over time. While she rarely spoke about finances, her lifestyle reflected careful planning rather than indulgence. A significant part of her financial story is inseparable from her partnership with Fernando Poe Jr. Together, they represented one of Philippine cinema's most powerful unions, both artistically and financially. Their combined assets, film earnings, and properties formed a stable foundation that lasted well beyond their years on screen. After FPJ's passing, Susan remained a careful steward of that legacy, preserving assets rather than liquidating them for short-term gain. What makes her story resonate so strongly with older audiences is its quiet strength. There were no scandals tied to money, no public disputes over assets, and no dramatic rise and fall narrative. Instead, Susan Roces embodied a form of success that many admire but few talk about: financial peace built through discipline, patience, and dignity. But while Susan's wealth was defined by quiet security, the next star represents something else entirely: the glamour, stability, and early old money that defined the true golden age of Philippine cinema. Susan Roces showed how discipline could protect wealth. The next icon reveals what happened when success arrived early and stayed steady for decades. Gloria Romero was the face of classic Philippine cinema at a time when the studio system was at its strongest. As a leading lady during the true golden age, she benefited from something many later stars never experienced: consistent contracts, regular film output, and predictable income. This wasn't a career built on short bursts of fame, but on reliability and long-term positioning.
Biday, mari bang makabisita namin gabi?
Pwede. During her peak years, studios ensured that their biggest stars were constantly working. That steady stream of roles translated into dependable earnings, allowing Gloria to accumulate assets early in life. Instead of chasing trends or overspending during her prime, she maintained a lifestyle that matched her income without stretching beyond it. Properties and savings built during those early decades became the backbone of her financial security. What sets her story apart is longevity without desperation. Even as the industry evolved, Gloria remained selective, appearing in projects that fit her image and preserved her value. That selectivity kept her relevant while protecting her reputation and her finances. Continued appearances in later years weren't about survival. They were about maintaining presence and dignity. Her wealth story is often overlooked because it lacks drama. There were no public disputes, no sudden losses, and no extravagant displays. Instead, she represents a generation of stars whose financial success looked quiet from the outside, but proved remarkably durable over time. And yet, as solid as Gloria Romero's old money stability was, the next woman on our list took a different route, one that blended stardom with authority, influence, and power far beyond the movie screen. Gloria Romero represented stability built early. The next icon shows what happens when fame is paired with influence and sustained over an entire lifetime. Vilma Santos is one of the few Filipino stars who successfully evolved with every era. Beginning as a child actress, she transitioned into dramatic superstardom, then later stepped into public service without ever losing relevance. Each phase of her career added a new layer to her financial foundation.
Dito ho, no exaggeration.
At her peak in film, Vilma was among the most bankable actresses in the country, commanding top-tier pay and consistent projects. Unlike stars who slowed down after their prime, she extended her earning years through smart role choices and television. Unlike stars who slowed, she extended her earning years through smart role choices and television. Unlike stars who slowed, she extended her earning years through smart role choices and television. Unlike stars who slowed, she extended her role choices and television. Unlike stars who slowed, What resonates most with older viewers is how controlled her rise was. There were no dramatic collapses, no public financial controversies, and no reliance on constant reinvention. Her success feels earned, structured, and intentional. Vilma's story bridges two worlds, the glamour of classic cinema and the influence of real-world power. But just as impressive as her disciplined approach is the next star's path, one driven by emotion, mass appeal, and a fortune built into a full-blown entertainment empire. Vilma Santos built wealth through structure and authority. The next star did it through something far more emotional: connection, loyalty, and mass appeal that never truly faded. Sharon Cuneta wasn't just popular. She was personal. For millions of Filipinos, especially women who grew up watching her, Sharon represented vulnerability, romance, and authenticity. That emotional bond became the foundation of one of the most durable fortunes in Philippine entertainment.
We're building in the south, and it was my lot that I bought after Boston, around 98, 99, after we lived in Boston.
At the height of her career, Sharon dominated multiple industries at once. She was a box office draw, a best-selling recording artist, and a top choice for major endorsements. Few stars managed to earn heavily across film, music, and advertising at the same time, and even fewer sustained it for decades. Those peak years generated enormous income, but what set Sharon apart was what she did next. Rather than relying solely on constant output, she transitioned toward long-term security. Real estate investments, high-value properties, and carefully chosen business interests allowed her wealth to grow even during periods when she stepped back from the spotlight. Her brand became selective, not overexposed, which preserved its value. Even during very public personal challenges, her financial position remained stable. That resilience is a key reason she continues to command influence today. Comebacks were never acts of desperation, they were choices. When she returned to television or music, it was on her own terms, backed by independence rather than necessity. For older audiences, Sharon's story resonates deeply. It reflects a woman who turned love from the public into lasting security, proving that emotional capital can become real, generational wealth. And yet, while Sharon built an empire through connection and choice, the next icon's fortune was shaped by something else entirely: legend, loyalty, and a legacy that outlived the man himself. Sharon Cuneta's wealth was built through emotional connection and choice. The next story is rooted in something deeper: myth, loyalty, and a name that never lost its power. Fernando Poe Jr. was more than a movie star. To many Filipinos, he was a symbol. That image translated into unmatched box office dominance for decades, making him one of the highest-earning actors in Philippine history during his prime. But unlike others who relied solely on performance fees, FPJ's wealth extended far beyond the screen. A significant portion of his fortune came from ownership. Through film production ventures and control over parts of his movie library, FPJ ensured that his work continued to generate income long after its original release. Reruns, syndication, and later restorations kept his films alive and profitable. These weren't just old movies, they became long-term assets. Real estate also played a major role in his financial legacy. Properties acquired during his most successful years were held rather than sold, allowing their value to appreciate quietly over time. What's notable is how little this was discussed publicly. FPJ's image was always about the masses, not material display, which made the size and durability of his estate surprising to many. After his passing, public disclosures tied to his family revealed just how carefully structured that legacy was. His wealth didn't disappear, It transitioned. Assets continued to support his loved ones and preserve his name's influence in both entertainment and public life. FPJ's story shows how legend can become currency, and how control, not excess, can turn fame into permanence. But after the strength and seriousness of FPJ's legacy, the next icon brought something different: laughter, warmth, and a fortune built on making an entire nation smile. Fernando Poe Jr.'s legacy was defined by strength and symbolism. The next icon earned his fortune in an entirely different way, by making people laugh year after year without ever losing their trust. Dolphy, known as the King of Comedy, held a position in Philippine entertainment that no one else has replicated. His career stretched across generations, formats, and audiences. While many stars burned bright and faded fast, Dolphy stayed relevant through consistency. That longevity became the foundation of his wealth.
Hoy, ikaw tanda ah. Huwag kang tingin ng tingin sa baraha ko ah. Ukukitin ko yung mata mo.
Rather than relying on blockbuster moments, Dolphy earned steadily. Television shows, films, live performances, and later endorsements created a constant flow of income over decades. This kind of sustained earning allowed him to build assets gradually, without pressure or financial risk. By the time he slowed down, the foundation was already solid. What truly sets his story apart is how his wealth was structured around family. With many children, Dolphy focused on security and continuity rather than extravagance. Properties, savings, and ongoing royalties were arranged to ensure that his legacy would continue supporting his family long after he was gone. Even today, his name still carries value, opening doors for his children in entertainment and business. Unlike other icons, Dolphy never projected power or wealth. His public image remained humble, almost ordinary. That contrast makes the reality of his estate more striking. His fortune wasn't loud, but it was carefully protected and thoughtfully passed on. For older viewers, Dolphy represents something deeply comforting: the idea that success doesn't have to be aggressive to be lasting. But while Dolphy's wealth was built on warmth and family, the next star's story takes a sharper turn. One where fame crossed into politics and entertainment money transformed into real-world power. Dolphy's fortune was shaped by warmth and family. The next story moves into far more complicated territory, where fame didn't just earn money, but opened the door to power. Joseph Estrada began as one of the most recognizable tough guy stars in Philippine cinema. During his peak years, he was a consistent box office draw, starring in films that portrayed him as the voice of the masses. That image translated into strong, steady earnings at a time when leading men were paid generously and worked frequently. But Estrada's financial story didn't stop with acting. As his popularity grew, so did his influence. The transition from screen idol to political figure dramatically changed the scale of his wealth. Entertainment income expanded into a wider network of assets, connections, and opportunities that came with public office. While his political career brought intense scrutiny, it also cemented his status as more than just a former actor. Over the years, reports and public records have pointed to substantial property holdings and accumulated assets, many of which remained relevant long after his acting days slowed down. His wealth became intertwined with political stature, creating a legacy that extended beyond cinema and into governance and dynasty building.
Thank you very much, and once again, congratulations to our Academic Excellence awardees. A round of applause for them.
What makes his story compelling and controversial is that it sits at the intersection of admiration and criticism. To supporters, he embodied the idea that a man from the movies could rise to national leadership. To critics, questions and accusations followed him long after his peak popularity. For viewers, Estrada represents a turning point in how celebrity wealth can evolve. Fame was no longer just about earnings, it became leverage. And after a story filled with power and controversy, the next icon brings the focus back to discipline, hard work, and a career built on sheer consistency rather than spectacle. After Joseph Estrada's story of fame turning into power, the next icon reminds us that some fortunes are built quietly, through discipline, professionalism, and decades of uninterrupted work. Eddie Garcia was never marketed as a matinee idol, yet he became one of the most dependable figures in Philippine entertainment history. His career spanned more than half a century, covering film, television, and directing. While others relied on peak popularity, Eddie relied on consistency, and that made all the difference financially. He worked across genres and generations, rarely out of demand. This constant presence meant a steady flow of income rather than dramatic highs and lows. Even as younger stars came and went, Eddie continued booking roles, often playing authority figures that fit his age and reputation. Those later career projects weren't symbolic. They were paid, regular work that extended his earning years far beyond most of his peers. Financially, his approach mirrored his work ethic. He lived within his means, avoided flashy displays of wealth, and focused on sustainability. There were no public stories of reckless spending or sudden financial trouble. Instead, his long career allowed him to accumulate savings and assets gradually, reinforcing stability rather than risk.
Yung kung anong nagawa niya sa industriya ng Pilipinas, ng film.
What makes Eddie Garcia's wealth story resonate is its realism. Not every icon built an empire or controlled massive properties. Some, like Eddie, built security by showing up every time, delivering quality work and staying relevant without chasing fame. For older viewers, his story feels familiar and respectable, a reminder that persistence can be just as powerful as superstardom. And as disciplined as Eddie Garcia's career was, the final name on our list takes us even further back, into the earliest days of Philippine stardom, where fame, politics, and fortune first began to intersect. Eddie Garcia's story showed how consistency could quietly build security. The final icon on our list takes us even further back, into a time when Philippine stardom itself was still being invented. Rogelio de la Rosa was one of the country's earliest matinee idols, rising to fame when cinema was becoming a national obsession. In an era with fewer stars and massive audience demand, leading men like Rogelio commanded extraordinary influence. His popularity translated into high earnings relative to the time, especially under the studio system that rewarded bankable faces with steady work. But what truly set him apart was what came next. Instead of remaining solely within entertainment, Rogelio transitioned into politics, becoming a senator and extending his relevance far beyond the screen. That move allowed his fame to convert into long-term social and financial capital. Acting provided the foundation, but public office expanded his reach, stability, and access to opportunity. Unlike modern celebrities, wealth during his era wasn't loudly documented. Assets were often tied up in land, connections, and status, rather than visible cash flow. Still, historians and industry accounts suggest that Rogelio was among the first Filipino stars to successfully preserve wealth after leaving showbiz, something many of his contemporaries struggled to do.
Nahihiyaw ko eh. O kinakailangan isayuhin natin yan eh. Sige.
His story matters because it established a pattern. Long before later icons followed similar paths, Rogelio demonstrated that fame could be leveraged into lasting security if handled carefully. He represents the blueprint, where celebrity, power, and wealth first converged in Philippine history. And with that, we've traced a full circle. From the earliest stars who shaped the industry to the icons whose legacies continue supporting families today, proving that true success doesn't fade when the spotlight does. From Rogelio de la Rosa's early blueprint to the icons who followed, one thing becomes clear. Golden Age stardom was never just about fame. For those who understood its value, it became a way to secure the future long after the applause ended. Some of these stars built wealth through discipline and restraint. Others relied on longevity, consistency, or emotional connection with the public. A few transformed celebrity into power, while others quietly protected what they earned and let time do the rest. What unites them is that their success didn't vanish when the screen faded to black. Their estates, properties, royalties, and influence continue to support families and shape Philippine culture today. These stories also challenge how we view success in entertainment. The loudest careers weren't always the most secure. Often, it was the careful choices made away from public view that mattered most. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden wealth and lasting legacies of Golden Age Filipino stars, make sure to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Which story surprised you the most? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our future uploads.